Hello, hello, beautiful listener. My name is AP Mobley, and I'm your host here at the Myths and Folktales and Fairy Tales podcast. I'm also the author of dark fantasy inspired by mythology, so if you ever wanted to check out my books, I'd really appreciate it. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to finally be recording this episode. All month I've been thinking about it, but stuff just kept coming up. You'd think it would only be holiday and getting ready for the New Year stuff, since it's December. And I mean, it was a lot of holiday and getting ready for the New Year stuff, but it was also a whole lot of book stuff. This month, I decided to crack down on finishing The Bone Fairy, because if it's going to come out in 2025, that has to be done. Seriously, if I didn't have deadlines, it would take me so much longer to finish projects. But I'm really happy with how the book is coming along. With every pass I make on it, with every revision, the characters show themselves a little bit more to me, and I'm very excited for everyone to meet them, especially Gus. If you wind up reading the book, I think you'll find out pretty quickly why I have such a soft spot for him. Anyway, this episode isn't about Bone Fairy or Gus. It's about creation and underworld myths from Egyptian mythology. So let's start getting into it. As I told you in my Myth of the First Egyptian Mummy episode from the Stories That Shaped Me section of the podcast, ancient Egypt has always been an interest of mine, and my love for Egyptian mythology has only grown stronger as I get older and continue reading about it. That's one reason why I wanted it to be the second episode in the creation and underworld myths section of the podcast. But another reason I thought it would work well as second in the lineup here is because of how old the Egyptian culture actually is. From a lot of what I've read, it seems ancient Egypt is just a bit younger than ancient Sumer, which we talked a bit about in the Mesopotamian creation and underworld myths episode. But some Egyptologists say that they found Egyptian writings that are as old as the earliest writings from Sumer. So it's possible that the two cultures could have even appeared closer together than scholars originally estimated. Another interesting detail I wanted to mention is that ancient Egypt survived for over 3,000 years. And considering the culture was around for so long, it only makes sense that it influenced other cultures. In fact, as ancient Egypt encountered other civilizations, some crossover in the mythologies occurred. One great example of this is the god Serapis. From what I've read, Serapis is a unique Greco Egyptian god whose cult was launched by a Greek pharaoh attempting to unite the Egyptian and Greek peoples he ruled over. Other examples of Egyptian mythology crossing over with Greek mythology would be some of the merged gods, like Hermanubis, a figure combining Hermes and Anubis, and Zeus Ammon, a figure combining Zeus and Ammon. All right, so we've established that ancient Egypt is old, like really old, that it was around for an extremely long time, and that it influenced the other cultures around it. But what did its creation myths look like? Did it have a single unified creation story? Or was it like ancient Mesopotamia in the sense that different regions had different explanations for how the world came to be? According to my research, the latter is true. There are a handful of different creation stories in Egyptian mythology. However, the one I'm most familiar with is the Heliopolitan creation story, so it's the one I wanted to share with you today. Our story begins with the waters of chaos, Nu, and from these waters, the primary deity of the myth appears, Atum or Ra, the creator god and the god of the sun. I think it's important to note here that some sources claim Atum and Ra are completely separate gods, Atum being the chief creator god and a sun god, and Ra being a sun god and the king of the gods. While others claim that Atum and Ra are the same god, and that the names Atum and Ra can be used interchangeably for him. I've also read that Atum and Ra are different aspects of the same creator slash sun god, and that his name changes as he changes throughout the day. Ra being his name during midday, when the sun is highest in the sky, and Atum being his name in the evening, when the sun is setting. Now, when I first read this creation story, the narrator referred to the creator slash sun god as both Atum and Ra, but for the sake of clarity, I'm just going to refer to him as Atum. Anywho, let's get back to the story. Like I said before, Atum emerges from the waters of chaos, and he stands on an island in the water. But the thing is, he's all alone, so he spits out a son and names the new deity Shu. He also makes Shu the god of the air and wind and peace, all that good stuff. Next, he spits out a daughter. He names his daughter Tefnut, and he makes Tefnut the goddess of, like, water and rain and mist and dew. Atum employs his son and daughter to basically help him bring order and create the world. But before they can really get started, they get lost in the waters of chaos. Atum obviously becomes very concerned when his children don't return to him, and so he sends out his all-seeing eye to find them. When the all-seeing eye does finally find Shu and Tefnut, it brings them back to Atum, and upon seeing his children again, Atum weeps tears of joy, and those tears of joy result in the creation of humankind. Since Atum has all these new little humans to take care of, he needs a suitable place for them to live. So he makes the moon, named Yah, and then Shu and Tefnut get together, and Tefnut eventually gives birth to the earth, Geb, and the sky, Nut. Geb and Nut also get together, and Nut gives birth to four more deities that I'm sure you're at least a little familiar with if you know anything about Egyptian mythology, or if you've listened to my first Egyptian mummy episode a while back. But those deities are Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. In short, this creation myth explains how the world came to be and how 9 of some of the most important gods in the Egyptian pantheon, sometimes referred to as the Aeneid, came to be. All right, we've talked a bit about ancient Egypt and about one of its creation myths. But before I move on to my favorite part of just about every mythology, the underworld, I wanted to briefly tell you about an element of Egyptian mythology that's really cool and that I think is relevant to the topic of creation and the afterlife and whatnot. The ancient Egyptians believed that a person's soul wasn't made of just one part. They believed the soul was made of several parts, usually 9, but sometimes less. There was the physical body, the spiritual body, the life force, the personality, the essence, the shadow, the intellect, the heart, and the name. And for a person to be able to live on after death, all the parts of their soul had to remain in good condition. This is why mummification was so important. The physical body had to be preserved so that the soul as a whole could survive. Okay, now on to the part I've been itching to talk about this whole time. The underworld. The underworld from Egyptian mythology, called the Duat, is a fascinating realm indeed. Not only is it where souls journey to after death, but it's also where the sun deity and the king of the gods, Ra, journeys to each night, to die as the sun sets in the evening and then be reborn as the sun rises in the morning. To start, let's talk about a soul's journey through the perilous parts of the Duat. It was believed that after death, a person could obtain everlasting life in the kingdom of Osiris if they navigated the Duat correctly. Now, no matter how much I wish I could, I can't give you a concrete description of the Duat, but there are some descriptions of it in ancient Egyptian funerary texts. In the Book of Gates, a soul must pass through various gates in the Duat, each of which are guarded by serpent beings. A lake of fire, an island of fire, and a fire-breathing snake are also described in the Book of Gates. In the Book of Caverns, there are 6 caverns in which the sun god Ra must pass through. Then, in the Theban recension of the Book of the Dead, there are spells for warding off crocodiles and snakes, solutions for escaping soul stealers and the second death, as well as a whole bunch of other spells and pieces of advice for navigating the underworld. Basically, the ancient Egyptians believed that when you died, you went to the Duat, and if you were wealthy enough in life to purchase one, you'd be equipped with a list of spells that we now refer to as the Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead is essentially a guide to help you navigate the underworld all the way to the Hall of Mot, so that your heart can be weighed to determine whether you're worthy of eternal life in the kingdom of Osiris. So, after death in the Duat, with your Book of the Dead, you would face a series of obstacles, which could be evil gods and spirits, bloodthirsty serpents and crocodiles, fiery lakes and islands, or guarded gates and caverns. The spells in your Book of the Dead would help you survive these obstacles so you weren't captured and tortured, or so that you wouldn't suffer from a second death. If you suffered from a second death, that meant you'd simply cease to exist. And for the ancient Egyptians, that was the ultimate punishment. Once you finished navigating the perilous parts of the Duat and you reached the Hall of Mot, which, for reference, because I think I forgot to mention it earlier, Mot is the goddess of balance, truth, and justice. But, there in Mot's hall, you would be judged by her 42 assessors. After that, your heart would be weighed against her feather. If your heart did not weigh more than the feather, you could be permitted to enter the kingdom of Osiris and gain everlasting life. If your heart did weigh more than the feather, your heart would be devoured by Ammit, a terrifying goddess or demoness. Ammit has the head of a crocodile, while the front part of her body is that of a lion or leopard, and the back part of her body is that of a hippo. But way worse than all that, if Ammit ate your heart, you would no longer exist. There would be no afterlife for you at all. I mentioned earlier that the sun god slash king of the gods, Ra, travels through the Duat every night, his journey symbolizing the death and rebirth of the sun as it sets in the evening and rises again in the morning. In yet another ancient Egyptian funerary text called the Amduat, it said there are 12 sections of the underworld that Ra travels through within the 12-hour time frame he spends in the underworld each night. While he's in the underworld, he also battles Apep, the massive serpentine god of destruction and darkness and chaos. According to just about everything I've read pertaining to this subject over the years, Ra and Apep's nightly battle is representative of the constant struggle between good and evil, which of course is a timeless theme that people will never grow tired of. At least I know I won't. Before I go, I thought I'd let you know that if you're interested in reading my free book, Wrath of Persephone, the link to download the ebook is in this episode's description. If you want more myths, folktales, and fairy tales, I've also included the link to my myths, folktales, and fairy tales blog in the description. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for the next Creation and Underworld Myths episode, which will either be about the creation and afterlife stories from Hindu mythology or Greek mythology. I haven't decided which one yet. If you have a preference, be sure to send me a message on one of my social media accounts. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. I'll see you next time.